There are cases where the truth hides behind a stranger, a shadowy figure, a person nobody knows, a dangerous man passing through town. But this case was different because when 15-year-old Annie Kasprzak disappeared from her home in Utah, the first fear was simple. Maybe she ran away, maybe she was hiding, maybe she would come home. But by the next morning, that hope was gone. A disturbing scene was found near the Jordan River. Then Annie's body was discovered, and from that moment, the case changed forever. It was no longer a missing teenager case, it was a murder investigation. But the most disturbing twist was not only what happened to Annie, the twist was who investigators eventually came back to. A teenage boy, someone close to her, someone who had been questioned early, someone who, according to investigators, already had an explanation ready for why Annie's blood could be connected to him. And at the center of it all was one claim, a pregnancy claim, a claim that created pressure, a claim that changes the emotional weight of the relationship, a claim that later turned out not to be true. This is the case of Annie Kasprzak, a case about a teenager emotion, fear, lies, forensic evidence, and the justice system forced to answer one painful question. When a 14-year-old commits an adult-level crime, what should justice look like? Before Annie became a case file, before her name appeared in court records, before her story became a true crime documentary, she was a daughter. Her full name was Annie Kasprzak, but to the people who loved her, she was Annie. She was only 15 years old. She was a teenager with friends, family, emotions, dreams, and a future that should have stretched far beyond one night in March. That detail matters because in true crime, the crime often becomes bigger than the victim. The evidence becomes the focus, the suspect becomes the focus, the twist becomes the focus. But Annie was not a twist. She was a real girl. She had people who loved her. She had a family waiting for her. She had a life that was still beginning. And like many teenagers, she was living in that difficult space between childhood and adulthood. Old enough to want independence, young enough to still need protection. That is one of the most painful parts of this case, because when people look back at Annie's final days, they see a teenager surrounded by complicated emotions, complicated relationships, and a claim that would later become central to the investigation. On March 10, 2012, Annie was last seen at home in Revelton, Utah. That evening, her family believed she was inside the house, but later when they checked her room, Annie was gone. At first, nobody knew exactly where she had gone. Maybe she had stepped out, maybe she had gone to meet someone, maybe she planned to come back. But then her phone became important. Her phone was tracked near the Jordan River, and then it stopped. That one detail is chilling. Her phone did not lead police to a friend's house. It did not lead them to a busy public place. It led toward the river. And then it went silence. For any parent, that silence is terrifying, because a missing teenager can mean many things. A fight at home, a secret meeting, a runaway situation, a friend hiding her. But a phone going quiet near a river changes everything. Now every minute matters. Now every unanswered call feels heavier. Now the question is not only where Annie went, it is who she met and why. The next morning, the case took a devastating turn. A jogger noticed sign of violence near a footbridge close to the Jordan River. Then Annie was found. The search for a missing girl became the search for a killer. In the early stage of the investigation, the clues were limited but disturbing. Annie's shoes was found near the bridge area. Her body was found in the Jordan River. Her phone was never found, and investigators began trying to piece together what happened between the moment Annie left home and the moment she was discovered. The phone records became important. Investigators looked at the call Annie received that night. Some calls were listed as unavailable. One call happened early in the evening and lasted long enough to matter. Other calls happened close to the time she disappeared. That does not automatically prove who was on the phone, but in an investigation, timing matters. A phone call before a disappearance can become a doorway. Who called? What was said? Was Annie asked to meet someone? Was she scared? Was she calm? Did she believe she was going somewhere safe? Police also received information about a teenage boy with a BMX-style bike near the bridge around the time Annie disappeared. That detail would later become important because investigators found a BMX-style bike connected to the teenage boy Annie had been seeing. Again, one clue alone does not solve a case, but clues build pressure. A phone location, a river, a bridge, a bike sighting, a missing phone, a relationship. And then investigators began focusing on the person close to Annie, her teenage boyfriend, drawing Christopher Bagshaw. This is where the case becomes emotionally complicated. Annie had reportedly told people she was pregnant. She had told people the baby was connected to her boyfriend. But when her family had her take a pregnancy test, the tests came back negative. Later, medical findings also showed that Annie was not pregnant. This part has to be handled carefully because Annie was 15. Teenagers sometimes say things they do not fully understand. Sometimes they are looking for love. Sometimes they are afraid of losing someone. Sometimes they are trying to hold on to a relationship. Sometimes they are overwhelmed and do not know how to step back. That does not make what happened to Annie her fault. Nothing about this makes Annie responsible. The responsibility belonged to the person who chose violence. But psychologically, the pregnancy claim matters because it may have created fear, panic, anger, or pressure inside the relationship. And that pressure becomes one of the most important parts of the case. A teenage girl says she's pregnant. A teenage boy hears it. The adults around them begin learning about it, and then Annie disappears. The question becomes impossible to ignore. Did that claim become the trigger? One of the strongest detail in this case involve a shoe. When investigators questioned Bagshaw after Annie's death, they noticed he was wearing new shoes. That detail caught their attention, so they asked about his old shoes. Bagshaw gave an explanation. He said Annie had gotten a nosebleed at a friend's house. He said that was how blood got on his shoelace, but that explanation did not end the suspicion. It increased it because investigators later believed Bagshaw had asked a friend to support the nosebleed story. That matters because in criminal investigations, full explanation behavior can be powerful. A person can panic and say the wrong things. But when someone creates a specific explanation for physical evidence and then asks another person to support that explanation, investigators look at that very differently. In a simple terms, why explain blood before police prove what it means? Why ask someone else to confirm a story? Why create a reason for blood to be on a shoe? And then came the forensic detail. Investigators later confirmed that blood found on Bagshaw's shoelace belonged to Annie. That changed everything. The case was no longer only about suspicion. It had a physical connection. Annie's blood, his shoelace, and the story investigators did not believe. But this case did not move in straight line. At first, the investigation was thrown off. A false step led police in another direction. For a time, investigators looked at other possible suspects. But those suspects were later cleared. And after that, investigators returned to Bagshaw. That part is important because this case shows how investigation can lose time when a false lead becomes too loud. A tip can look promising. A suspect can look dangerous. A public theory can feel convincing. But if the evidence does not support it, detectives have to return to the facts. That is what happened here. The truth was not found by chasing the loudest story. It was found by returning to the physical evidence, the timeline, the phone records, the relationship, and the behavior after Annie's death. For Annie's family, that delay meant years of pain, years without answers, years of wondering whether someone was getting away with murder. And during those years, her parents did not stop pushing, because a case can go quiet in public, but it never goes quiet inside the home. The empty chair stays, the birthdays still come, the questions never stop. More than 2 years after Annie was killed, Darwin Christopher Bagshaw was arrested. At the time Annie died, he had been 14 years old. By the time he was arrested, he was 17. That creates a serious legal question. Should he be handled as a juvenile, or should he face adult court? This was not a small technical issue. Juvenile court is built around rehabilitation. Adult court is built around punishment, public safety, and longer sentences. In Annie's case, the court had to weigh two realities at the same time. The defendant was a child when the crime happened, but the crime was extremely serious. This is one of the deepest legal questions in this case. How do you measure accountability when the offender is young? How do you respect brain development research without minimizing the victim? How do you protect the public while acknowledging that a 14-year-old brain is not the same as an adult brain? This is no easy answer, but the court made its decision. Bagshaw would face the murder charge as an adult. A trial was expected, but before the trial began, Bagshaw pleaded guilty to murder. That plea changed the direction of the case. For Annie's family, it matters, not because it brought Annie back, nothing could do that, but because it ended the legal uncertainty. In court, Bagshaw admitted guilt. The legal question was unanswered. But the human question remained. Why? Why did this happen? Why did Annie have to die? Why did someone so young make such a devastating choice? That is the cruel truth of many guilty pleas. They answer the legal question, but they do not always answer the human question. The legal question is who committed the crime. The human question is why. And in Annie's case, her family still had to live with that missing answer. At sentencing, Bagshaw was given 15 years to life in prison. In court, he apologized, but an apology cannot undo a crime. An apology cannot bring back a daughter. An apology cannot give a family back the years that were stolen. At sentencing, the defense raised his age. They argued he had been only 14 at the time of the murder. They also argued about sustainable use of adolescence development. The prosecution focused on the severity of the crime, and that is where the legal and psychological perspective becomes important. The defense did not argue that Annie's death did not matter. The defense argued that the age of the offender mattered. The prosecution argued that the seriousness of the crime matter more. Both ideas can exist at the same time. Teen brains are still developing. Teenager can be impulsive. Teenager can make reckless decisions. But impulsivity does not erase responsibility. And youth does not erase the victim. That was the balance the court had to decide. In the end, the judge opposed the adult sentence, 15 years to life. This is not only about one violent act, it is also about pressure, teenage identity, fear, image, relationship control, and emotional immunity. Annie was a teenager who reportedly told people she was pregnant, even though later finding showed she was not. That claim likely changed the emotional environment around her relationship. For a teenager, a pregnancy claim can feel life-ending, even when adults know there are options, support system, and ways forward. A young woman can feel trapped. A young person can panic. A young person can believe one problem will destroy everything. But again, that doesn't not excuse violence. It explains pressure. It does not remove guilt. For a psychological perspective, this case shows how dangerous it's become when emotional panic mixes with secrecy. If someone believes their future is being terminated, if they lack emotional control, if they lack mature problem solving, if they think violence can erase a problem, then a temporary fear can lead to a permanent tragedy. That is one of the hardest lesson in Annie's case. A conversation could have happened, and adults could have been involved, the truth could have been clarified. The pregnancy test was negative. There was no baby, but Annie did not get the chance to live past that lie. Legally, this case teaches several things. First, physical evidence matter. The shoelace evidence become critical because it connects Bakshaw to Annie in a way his explanation did not resolve. Second, behavior after a crime matter. The alleged attempt to get a friend to support the nosebleed story become important because it suggests someone may have been trying to explain away evidence before the truth come out. Third, false leads can delay justice. The only focus on other possible suspects shows how one bad tip can pull an investigation in the wrong direction. Fourth, juvenile justice is complicated. Bakshaw was 14 at the time of Annie's murder. That age matter in psychology, but the court also had to consider the seriousness of the crime, public safety, and Annie's life. That is why this case still creates debate. The case of Annie is not just a story with an insane twist. It is a warning about how fast teenage fear can turn dangerous, a warning about how lies can create pressure that young people are not ready to handle, a warning about how investigators must follow evidence, not assumption, and a warning that justice, even when it comes, never gives a family back what was taken. Annie was 15. Bakshaw was 14 when he killed her. That is what makes this case so hard to understand. Two teenagers, one terrible decision, one life ended, one life sent into the prison system, and one family left asking a question no sentence can fully answer. Why? Rest in peace, Annie. And may her story remind us that behind every case file is a real person who deserves a future. Thank you.